Good morning, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the Inclusion and Conversation, sponsored and hosted by the Inclusion Initiative. I am your host and moderator. I'm Grace Young Foster. I'm the founder and CEO of the Inclusion Initiative. And today we have a really wonderful guest speaker joining us who's going to talk to us about some very interesting identity research that they have done and just a little bit about their perspective of lived experience and how that really impacts, right, how we think about identity, belonging, inclusion. But before we begin, again, a warm welcome to everybody attending. But I want to remind folks that this is a place, a space where we really honor lived experience and respect lived experience. And as our audience today, our wonderful audience, we'd love for you to engage with us, to share your questions or comments in the chat and comment section. React to all the wonderful things that our guest speaker Anthony is going to share. But again, respect our intention of really honoring the lived experience that is brought to the table today and the perspectives that we bring with our lived experience as adoptees and foster alums doing this really important work. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for having open hearts and open minds as we dive into our conversation. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to our awesome guest speaker. Anthony has been doing a lot of research and really critical identity work over in the UK, but obviously it's spanned across the globe, as here in the US, they have caught our attention. And I've been following Anthony for a little while on Instagram and different socials, and just found their writing, their perspectives pretty profound. And they also co-founded an organization called In Between the Lines. And through all of just the awesome work that I've seen, I reached out on LinkedIn, and we just had a really interesting and insightful first conversation. And Anthony is now a part of the Inclusion Initiative as an amazing member and participant. And I'm so excited to have them on with us today to talk a little bit about their work and their really profound and compelling paper. So without further ado, welcome, Anthony. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi Grace. Hi everyone. Thanks for having me.
Yes, really awesome to be able to be in this space with you and dive into just your story, your journey, and now this incredible paper that you've written. So as much or as little as you'd like the audience to know, share with us a little bit about your story and journey.
Yeah, so currently I'm working as a lived experience researcher at Quorum, and I'm also a member of the all-party parliamentary group for adoption and permanence. So I'm based in London working in that. But my adoption history was that I was fostered at 8 days old and then adopted at 20 months old. And I was, and this was all in London. And so I was adopted by a family that looks like me. So I'm mixed heritage, and my adopted mother is white and my adopted father is black, and they have 2 biological daughters who are mixed. So they also adopted another little brother, and so there's 4 of us. And I didn't have that experience of difference. We all looked very similar, and I grew up in a very multicultural borough and area of London. So that in some ways was a real blessing, where I could just hide with my adoptive identity. But in other ways, my adoption was difficult because I didn't really when people would ask me where I'm from, I wouldn't know what answer to give, because I could give this really complicated, adoptive story, or I could just pretend and be like, oh, I'm half Scottish and half from this Caribbean island called Montserrat. And in reality, ethnically, I'm half Jamaican and half white, and it kind of depends what DNA test you use. So growing up, it always felt like I was sort of in between this adoptive family and biological family, and then also within my ethnicities and the blackness and whiteness, and trying to make sense of that. And so I struggled with that for a while, and then went to university, did a politics philosophy and an economics degree, and so that's my background. And once I finished uni, I kind of needed to really work out a lot of my adoption stuff, and so that was about 2 years ago. And I was like, why not do it at the agency through which I was adopted? And so I was adopted through Quorum, and so I've been working with them for the past year and a half, really trying to embed lived experience in all aspects of their decision-making structure, and also just kind of raise the profile of adoption and lived experience in the UK youth sector, in the mental health sector, and just really try and have more sophisticated conversations on identity.
Wow. That's really incredible. And I really appreciate that, you have taken the experience of your life and your story, and you've recognized, right? There's a huge gap in the conversation. There's a huge gap in the understanding of what this lived experience means, especially with living through and with intersectional identities where we're not just one label. There's no one label really for one person, right? We all bring complexities to the table through our identities. So that's really interesting that you've been able to really highlight that in your work and work with Quorum. And I appreciate that they wanted to work with you in this way. We know that adoption agencies, it can be a challenge, right, to center and highlight the experience of adoptees and those going through the child welfare system. And so, would you mind talking a little bit about your experience there in integrating your work with Quorum?
For sure. So when I finished university, I just started In Between Lines, and In Between Lines, originally there was 4 of us, and we had all been part of the Exeter Decolonizing Network, which was a group of academics and students trying to sort of produce decolonial practice and policy. And so we all met for coffee, and we grew up in 5 different countries: Singapore, Tenerife, Ghana, Belgium, and just London for me, England. But we all, despite having completely different lived experience and upbringings, some of us were adopted, some of us weren't, we just managed to connect on this level that just felt different to all the other connections that we had before, where it was just like, I feel really seen by this person who seems to have a completely different lived experience. And so we created an exhibition from that conversation, and then ended up talking about the common issues that people with what we call complex identities face. So people who belong to multiple families, cultures, and ethnicities. And so we produced an exhibition for places in Exeter, Cornwall, which is in the southwest of England. And so all of us were basically London based at that point. And so we wanted to share this with our friends and family rather than just kind of being in that corner of the country. And so I messaged someone at Quorum, and they were just really open. They really wanted to hear our experience. And so we managed to host this event last April, where we had about 130 people attend over the week, with conversation panels, for professionals and lived experience, as well as a poetry night. And that for me was definitely the moment when I realized that all of this healing work and really trying to sort out my adoption narrative, really, like, it was just amazing for me, because I had my biological family there, I had my adoptive family there, I
Wow.
had all of my friends from school, from university, from home, people I've known since I was 2 years old, and they were all just in this place seeing my exhibition and all of the issues that I faced, whether it was to do with hair, family, dealing with like colorism, and just finding our place and belonging. And there was just a moment where I could just feel my heart just go click, and was just like, wow, okay, this project isn't just about me and my healing and my narrative. It's how do we spread this to other people? And so afterwards we were given we were offered an internship at Quorum to develop the idea. And so for the past almost like 8 months, we've really been developing our brand identity and what exactly we stand for in terms of our communities. Because every time we would go to an event, it would feel like there would be someone from a completely different community to us, whether that was in like immigration or migration or care leavers, just people who are minority mixed, so people who aren't white black mixed but come from two non-white backgrounds.
Yeah.
It just didn't matter. There was just always this sort of connection and real understanding of our work. And so it's been really, really amazing for me to process a lot of my adoptive healing in my adoption agency by affecting positive change within it, and to do that through something that's so important to me, which is identity and belonging, and facilitating that for other people has been an incredibly special and meaningful journey.
Yeah, and I think what is really special about In Between Lines, and we'll talk later about your complex identities paper. What's really special about what you're doing, right, is you are creating visibility of folks that have not felt visible in all of their intersectional identities, because, right, broader society allows us to be one or the other, or something that's the most visual, right, which might be the color of our skin, or like you said, how your hair is presenting you as, the gender identity that you might present as. There's a lot of just assumptions, visual cues that place a lot of people in these boxes. But what you're doing, right, is elevating the conversation and the visibility of these less visible identities, but that are a huge part of us and who we are and how we navigate the world, and the impact that we want to make on the world through these identities. So that's really, really cool. And In Between Lines, like, clearly it's resonating with so many different communities, right? Because you have that unified mission of visibility, which then creates more conversation and inclusion, and then creates more of a sense of belonging in the world, which is really cool, right? Not just a sense of belonging with one race or one gender group or one region, but you're really creating a sense of belonging, that we belong in the world. That's really cool. And it makes me a little bit emotional too, right? Because with adopted identities, and I'm both an adoptee and foster alum, and I'm transracial and transnational. And so that belonging in the world has, and not until recently have I really felt that I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere in any part of society, right? And I think that's a common experience for a lot of us who are adopted. And I want to talk a little bit about what adoptee consciousness in the UK, like what that's like, what the conversation is around that, what the experience is for the adopted community in the UK, What have you seen and what are you experiencing?
I think where the adoptee consciousness is in the UK is at a really exciting point. And I think also just consciousness of any sort of marginalized group is seeming to be, well, it's quite a big statement, but I feel like it's finally beginning to get some real traction in research and policy. And there's like so much more to do. But all of this change has happened through what I would term like a lived experience movement. And so I think this is happening also in the US as well. But in the UK, there is this thing called lived experience research or peer research, which is about involving the target community in the research process. So rather than people going to a community, an expert from an academic institution going to a community and producing work about them, it's involving members of the community within the process so that research is produced for them and by them.
Yeah.
And so this has not just happened within adoption. There's a lot of good work in like disability, for example, in race, in gender. But in the adoption context, there seems to be an understanding that adoptees need to be round the table in discussions with adoption agencies. And that, for example, just that because adoption agencies work with young people, once you reach 18, the support kind of just dries up because you're just an adult. And so you're not really involved in the opportunities for decision making, just kind of go away because there just isn't the funding for it because it's in a youth sector kind of thing. And so there's been good strides in some adoption agencies. So, for example, Adoption UK has an adult advisory board, which is adult adoptees advising them, and they also have a youth adoptee advisory board. So we're beginning to see representation at higher levels of adoption agencies that we haven't seen before. And I feel like, for example, 2 weeks ago, I hosted a conversation panel for adult adoptees, and there seems to be just a more sense of urgency with improving support for adoptees throughout their journey. So whether that's through getting therapeutic support, there's this thing called the Adoption Support Fund where you can get therapy paid for. And so that has ended until that stops when you turn 22. And so there's like lots of talk about trying to extend that for later, because obviously for adoptees, you're not just going to turn 22 and then just like you're done, it's over. Yeah. A lot of people have that experience of dealing with adoptee grief and trauma when they have their own biological children, when they grow up and decide to search for reunion. And it's really important for policy to recognize that. And so I think by having more adoptees, more people with care experience in the research process, and also by having them in the room when decisions are being made. So I was part of a workshop for voluntary adoption agencies. There's this organization called CVAA, which is like the membership body for voluntary adoption agencies. Mm-hmm. And we were in the room when they were putting together their strategy or policy areas. And it's like, oh, once we have more people with lived experience just influencing the conversation, then we're going to start to see important change and making sure that they're paid for their time and that their opinions are valued, not just in like in like a professional sense. And so I think this is what I've tried to do with my paper, with trying to make sure that I'm producing things to a high quality in an academic and research sense, as opposed to just my lived experience. So I think it's a really exciting time for the UK, and also in connecting with groups across the world as well, which is what we're doing with the Inclusion Initiative. And it's really amazing to see the work that you're doing. We definitely need this in the UK for sure.
Oh, awesome. Well, I'm sure you and I can partner somehow and really start bringing this to the UK and beyond. So, yeah, I mean, it's what you're saying really resonates, with what I'm seeing here in the US as well. Just the more integration of lived experience, not just our lived experience as adoptees, but lived experience in so many different issue areas,
Yeah.
whether it's, experiencing homelessness or all of these different types of lived experience that, right, they seem like such huge, broad issues, and they are. But once you honor and bring in the voices of lived experience, I think we collectively can start to see, oh, there's some solutions here that aren't so big and unreachable as we thought, right? And that's what happens when you bring in lived experience voices. Like, there are very tangible, and I don't want to say simple, but just approachable things that these systems and communities and decision makers, to your point, can do to start creating change and start creating a better lived experience. But also, to your point, right? When we turn 22, it's our lives as that person with lived experience isn't over. It evolves and continues, and it can get more complex. And in the adoption context, right? Like, as you noted, when we start our families, or perhaps we want to do a birth search and really understand, right, where our roots are, that those are complex things. And as adults navigating life through the lens of our lived experience, we continue to need support. So yes, it's why you founded In Between Lines. Yes, it's why I founded the Inclusion Initiative. It's not what you shared, right, is not just the only solution. Incorporating lived experience like one time or two times or at one stage is not enough. It needs to continue. And creators, builders like us really need the resources and support to continue this work, to help folks throughout our whole lives, right, of lived experience, and hopefully make that experience better for the younger folks that are going through it now. So with that being said, right, I think, you're touching on some of the drivers and just some of the background, right, for developing your complex identity paper. Would love for you to walk us through uh, your paper a little bit in terms of, the overarching concept, just some of the core pieces that you really want our world to understand from your paper.
So when I was doing In Between Lines events, and I was having these amazing conversations with people who had completely different, on paper, lived experiences to me, people who weren't adopted, people who weren't mixed, immigrants from all over, people who spoke like completely different languages to me, and yet we were somehow connecting. And I wanted to try and produce a document or some research that would show this in the academic literature for professionals and policymakers and researchers, because I was having these conversations with professionals and the source was kind of just like, trust me. And I wanted to have something a little bit more rigorous than that. So what I wanted to do was to present this work also from a lived experience perspective. So from the idea that people with lived experience have insight into problems that they face, and so occupy a sort of special vantage point to talk about them and to identify them. So this was the lived experience perspective that I wanted to acknowledge. And I also wanted to put it into an intersectional lens. And the intersectional lens is all about, rather than looking at one lens or one factor to explain a problem. So rather than looking at class to explain poverty, only class, how do we look at multiple lenses to find out the unique ways in which particular oppressed groups are marginalized? So if we look at the problem of poverty, there is a particular way in which women of color are marginalized. There's a particular way in which disabled individuals are marginalized. There's different ways for any sort of group. And to look at only one alone, look at class alone, is to imagine that it's all a homogenous group. So I wanted to do that. And when I produced the paper, I wanted to talk about this experience of belonging to multiple categories, or to belonging to multiple identities within the same category. So as someone who's mixed, I belong I don't just have a Black identity, which is how society views me. I also have a white identity as well. Someone who is an immigrant or an international student, for example, has multiple, or could have multiple citizenship identities, or have spent meaningful time in other countries in the past. That impacts their sense of belonging. Someone with care experience will have multiple family identities, and also will have experienced not only a move in family, but a move in culture, a move in class, a move in religion, a move in race. And so what I did was that I did what's called a literature review, which is picking out several case studies of these particular communities. So I did one in mixed heritage. I did one in transracial care experience, another in border studies. So individuals who lived close. And actually it was Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands, which is about the lived experience of people living next to the US-Mexico border, and how there is this long history of in-betweenness there, not just with the Mexican identity and the American identity, but also the Aztec identity and indigenous identity, and acknowledging that. And then also incorporating third culture kids research. And so this research was done by this woman called Ruth Ram Raken, and her colleague David C. Pollock, who's died now, unfortunately. But that was about people who had spent some of their childhood in a different country because their parents moved there for study or work. So ambassadors, military. And so from all of these particular viewpoints, I created what I call a complex identity framework. And so this is a way of representing the multiplicity of belonging and identity that these people have. And this framework is important and useful because it doesn't group people by their communities. It groups them by the lived experience that they've had. So if we're looking at someone with multiple identities and nationality, we could have a refugee in there, we could have immigrants, we could have third culture kids, we could have international students. All of these groups have very different political status and funding status, and are seen to be very different. But for example, third culture kids and immigrants have quite a similar lived experience now, because third culture kids were always assumed to return back to their home country after having spent a couple of years there for work. But now also there's just, because of globalization, there is just more movement between these. And so what this framework does is that it overcomes what is called the silo mentality, which is this kind of belief that all of these communities are fundamentally different, and that knowledge within these communities only matter and are useful for that community. And that's not to say that these communities have very different lived experience. I'm not saying I have the same experience as someone who's moved countries, for example. But what I am saying is that if we can group people by what connects them rather than what is different to each other, then you're going to be able to share knowledge, you're going to be able to share resources, and you're also going to be able to feel that you can connect across social categories. As someone who's a mixed adoptee, who's Jamaican and white, there aren't a lot of people like me in the world. And it's going to be impossible to find some sort of funding or group that is kind of just that experience.
Right.
And I'm sure there's like a digital forum for it. But what In Between Lines has shown in practice, and what my paper will hopefully show in research, is that there can be connection across difference. And so I think it is a response to, these critiques of intersectionality, that it just puts people in boxes.
Yeah.
And it's meant to put us all into narrow interest groups who will argue with each other, and rather than the greater social good or political good. So I created this literature review, and I did it for professionals. So there's some policy and research directions for them to think about. And I've actually got a conference next week that I'll probably drop in the chat at some point, because there is a live stream of it. But for people with lived experience, I just wanted them to know that they're not alone. They don't just have this experience of being able to access multiple cultures, but sometimes feeling like they struggle to belong to any of them, that they can connect with other people, and that their experience is normal and also is really powerful. Having that cultural insight and ability to merge different parts of your identities and see the similarities and differences between them is a skill. And we need to acknowledge both the challenge and the opportunities for those groups.
Yeah, that's really profound. That's powerful. I love the framework, and it resonates on so many levels for me personally, but I think just, with our audience watching too. And it just, like, as you were talking, you saw me nodding my head a lot. But, a very small example of this is, the inclusion initiative itself. Like, we see, right, lived experience of adoptees here in the US. We also see lived experience of foster youth in the US. And society, the systems have really separated us and have encouraged us to really, like in your words, silo ourselves. Mm-hmm. When in fact, we're experiencing the very same system. It's the child welfare system here in the US. And for me, right, I had a huge problem with this. And I think because of my lived experience, having gone through both, I was both an adoptee and I was a foster youth, and I saw both in my home. And for me, it just did not make sense that we were separate groups, not working together, not talking to each other, right? To create some, noise within the system, but also to support each other outside the system, which is why the Inclusion Initiative, I'm trying to bridge that gap. I'm trying to bridge our two communities together to work together to elevate our shared lived experience in the child welfare system. Although being a foster youth is very different than being an adoptee, there's a lot of shared different experiences where we have the same feelings of, right, fear of displacement, not knowing where we quite belong, all of these types of experiences that we do share, even though on the day-to-day it looked different and was different. But I love that you've put language around this in your paper, and you've given folks a framework to really ground us, right, in this conversation of how do we see the similarities of our lived experience so that we can be more unified and create change and create a better future for each other and for ourselves. So thank you for that amazing, amazing work. I I cannot wait to dive in. I think that our communities having this framework, this really baseline of research that it's not out there yet. I haven't found it. I think you're one of the only folks that I know that has written something like this, not only for us with lived experience, but for organizations and institutions to utilize and infuse into how they move about building or continuing to, right, facilitate these types of these types of experiences for people that are coming through their institutions as adoptees, but as also as the care families and also as the organizations that are supporting, right? And you talk about how you want to elevate and work with the policymakers to create some change through, right, this paper that you've created, through the research that you've done, through this framework that you've built, right? You're trying to um, help that create some movement for real policy change. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like in the UK? What policies you'd like to see changed or created?
So within Quorum, myself and Zoe, who is the other half of In Between Lines at the moment, just want to shout her out as well, because it's not just me. We've
Hey, Zoe.
yeah. Never want to be like it's just me who's helped create this sort of movement and stuff like that. Alongside Millie, our colleague as well, we have created what's called a youth insight group, and so that will form part of the Institute for Children that Quorum is producing and is in development. And so the purpose of this is that, you know, we have a lot of research done by academic institutions and by experts going into organizations or into communities, and that's like a top-down form of research. But this paper is a bottom-up kind of research, and we need both. But we need to be able to generate authentic lived experience and be able to turn that into policy. And so we have set up a placement of researchers that once we leave Quorum, there will be a constant stream of people with lived experience who have finished like their university degree, and gives them the opportunity to agenda set rather than to just sort of be consulted. Because what Quorum has been really useful for me is that I've kind of just come in and been like, this is what I want to do, and this is the space that I need, these are the resources that I need, this is the time that I need, and they've been like, okay, you know, cook, go ahead. So I really want to advocate more of that, because I don't think this paper generates more questions rather than it gives answers. It's about creating spaces for people to talk about their lived experience. I'm only one person. I really want other people to contribute to this conversation and detail their own lived experience and other categories that haven't been explored. Like, for example, I've seen a couple papers talking about the experience of non-binary identity and that sort of being like in between. But I just didn't have enough to constitute a section. So I'd be really interested in seeing whether that's similar or different. But what I think will be the really interesting thing about next week, when we have some professionals come and respond to my paper, is how do we move this to policy change in like, hopefully like a, not just organizational, but governmental level. Mm-hmm. And the issue with that is that my sister's a civil servant. And so she always tells me that you've got to frame stuff in a cost benefit analysis, and, you know, it's got to be represented in monetary terms. And the purpose of this paper isn't necessarily to do that. It's to raise awareness and to provide a foundation for future research that can be a little bit more systematic within those individual communities. But this is always a challenge of how do we get from that point of here's the lived experience and now it's in a researched format, and then let's try and turn that into something that can be adapted that can be used by policymakers. And so I think that's the usefulness of it as a lens and a way of thinking about the world. So I think that transracial adoptees just kind of have, you know, it's just already in our heads of, you know, we do have this multiplicity of belonging. And hopefully for professionals who don't have that lived experience or other complex identities, they can really see that this is a thing and this is real, and that this is really important when we're thinking about the needs of people with complex identities.
You're really hoping that people will build upon this research alongside you, right? I'm assuming your work is just getting started
Yeah.
in terms of this kind of research and this kind of writing. So, in terms of where your published paper, where it stands now, how are you hoping? You shared a little bit, right? It's a lens. It's a lens to utilize as we're thinking about how we can make the world better, make the
Mhm.
experiences better. So, what's like one tangible way that you hope organizations will use your paper and framework, and individuals, right? Also interested in this work. How do you hope they'll use this paper in your framework?
For organizations, I would really love to see conversations with young people where they are allowed to talk about these sorts of topics. So not just their majority or like their dominant presentation. So for me, like my blackness, but being able to talk about with like a trusted adult the experience of what it's like to be in between, and for that to be legitimized. I think that's the main thing, is that young people need to feel, as they're developing their sense of identity, that they can exist in multiple places and that they don't just have to be one way. I know for myself, like when I when you are adopted, you have to have your you take your adopted parent's surname. So Lynch is my adopted parent's surname, but Williams is my biological first name. And just being
Mhm.
able to have those kinds of conversations, and just to equip social workers and youth workers, and getting them to, if a child comes up with and say, like, I feel a bit in between, or I don't know what my allegiance is, what I should be, to really validate that and to not try and push them one way or the other, and to let them know that that's okay. So I would say that would be the main thing for organizations at this stage, as well as funding grassroots groups such as
Absolutely. Yeah.
Lines, who are at the cutting edge of lived experience and know more about the issues of their community in a really personal way than many of the professionals, and making sure that there's space for them and that there's ability for them to connect and get paid properly for these kind of things. And then also for people with lived experience, again, it's just like, your experience is valid, it's normal, there are other people like you. And I think it's about, can we find connection within our own communities, within the adoptee communities, but also connection across difference? Can we encourage people to, for like, we have people from all over the world who are mixed heritage adoptees, immigrants, people with experience of migration,
Hmm.
just really learning to connect with the themes of people's experience rather than the labels, the feelings rather than the categories,
Yeah.
and knowing that, again, taking a both and perspective of things, not just an either or, you can be one way or the other, but that people can be multiple, and really giving yourself space to express that complexity of your identity, whether that's in your work or in your personal relationships, and being proud of that. I think that's partly what I wanted to do as well, was like a sense of pride in who we are,
Yeah.
rather than having to push ourselves into one box or another in order to fit in with the rest of society.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I'm certainly proud of you. I'm proud of the work that you've done, and your co-founders too, right? In
Mhm.
Between Lines is such a powerful movement and such a needed voice in this space. So thank you so much again for your work in that. And I wanted to ask you sort of a personal question, but younger Anthony, when you were in university and before, like, what did you picture yourself doing this kind of work at that age?
So I was doing work with Quorum when I was about 16, 17. And I think that was sort of like pre coming out the fog. So I was just like writing articles and just being like, oh, I'm really happy. I'm so grateful to be adopted and everything's great. And um, I think there would always be this idea of me coming back to Quorum. But I would say that once I finished university, I was just like quite lost. I'd achieved everything I'd kind of wanted to in uni, and still felt this sense of emptiness and just needing, like I was filling a hole. And I was just like, the only way through is to go within and really explore that work. And in doing that, I've realized that it's not just me. You know, I think often in research, we think that because, or like the opinion of one person or the feelings of one person is very biased. And obviously it's the lowest for expert opinion is the lowest form of evidence on the hierarchy of evidence, for example. But what I've realized is that your lived experience can be a portal to connect with other people and to express principles, themes, and general feelings and structures that a lot of people actually share. So I think it's been a really meaningful journey for me. And obviously, like 6 months ago, a year ago, I didn't realize it would sort of end up like this. And 2 years ago, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but it's been really amazing to sort of figure it out as I've gone along and realized that there is a place for me in the adoption world. There is a place for me in the lived experience world, and that my voice and my research skills and my capabilities matter, and that others matter as well, and that we need to make sure that, especially this is my thing with Quorum, after I leave, how do we make sure that this is a pipeline? You know, there are other people who've been doing such cool stuff in this space like yourself, and we just need to amplify that as much as possible.
Yeah, no, I love
keep
that.
It going.
I 100% agree with you. And I'm curious too, we're going to move into Q&A in a minute here, but really curious to hear from you, you know, with folks who, you know, not everyone, right, will work in the lived experience space or build in the lived experience space, but, you know, their voices are still super important in the places that they choose to work and contribute. And the folks that are a part of our community at the Inclusion Initiative, right? We're working to elevate the future of work for adoptees of color and foster care alums, because our lived experience is so invisible in the workplace. And through a myriad of reasons, right? It's kind of a ripple effect when you're feeling invisible and you can't really authentically share who you are. It can impact a lot of things for you, including career opportunities and equity, right, for you as a person with lived experience in the workplace. And it just would be awesome to hear, you know, for your perspective, for folks that will not necessarily, you know, dedicate their careers or spend the majority of their careers doing lived experience work like you or I. How can they authentically create space for themselves and for others with lived experience in their workplace?
So my applications for this research to adoptees and anyone with a complex identity, but specifically for Inclusion Initiative, is all about the inner journey and how sort of our own narratives as adoptees and our sense of belonging is kind of ordered and aligned. So I would say that it's really important to think about the sources of belonging or the places where you don't feel belonging. And for example, like, you know, adoptees suffer trauma and we have to deal with that. And that can be one sense of feeling this nagging sense of belonging. But I think what my research is suggesting is that there can be other places where belonging is needed. And so I think internally doing the work, doing, like, of course, journaling and really allowing yourself within your own, even within your own space, to accept the multiplicity of your identity. So for myself, it's all about like reconnecting with my Black culture and I don't know, like learning to, like, I did some Afrobeats classes the other day, and like cooking and writing and reading, and then also alongside that, like acknowledging the whiteness of my identity. Or I've had reunion with my biological family on one of my sides, and it's really hard managing like 5 families, 2 adopted, 2 biological, and 1 foster. But really just trying to, like, they're all my aunties, they're all my uncles, they're all my cousins, and that's just really, I'm just going to have to juggle that for the rest of my life. And really being able to hold that for yourself, I think really helps. If you've got that inner work sorted, it will help you move through the workplace a lot better, because your own story, where you stand, your positionality. And what this research is saying is that you can be in multiple places at the same time, and that's okay. You can speak as a mixed individual from the Jamaican side and then also from the white side, and that doesn't mean that like you're caught or that you're split or that you're like not enough of either one. It's just who you are, and also that experience can give you insight into connecting with other people who might not seem like they've got anything in common with you, but actually do. So again, it's hard because it's a lens. And everything is so context dependent. Where we're having this discussion is very up here rather than on the granular levels. But if you can apply this sort of principles and philosophies to your own situation and acknowledge the fullness of yourself, then I feel like that can really make the outer world and your work align a little bit more.
I love that. I think it's really important what you said, really understanding inside of yourself, like how you want to show up and who you are, understanding that it does make a huge difference. And Anthony, I want to thank you again for being here and sharing so much, teaching us so much in this, the 52 minutes that we've been in this space with you, and really writing complex identity paper and giving us that language and a framework to build upon as we internally understand, right, as lived experience people, like what that means to us, but also helping institutions, organizations, and society as a whole have some kind of concept, idea about what this means, right, and how to honor it. So it's really awesome, really, really amazing. I can't wait to read the whole thing. I'm so excited. I'm so excited you published it.
If anyone's interested, then I'd definitely say read the executive summary, then move to the complex identity framework section. A lot of it was written because I had to provide an evidence base for professionals and some policy recommendations. So if you're not interested in that, then please just pick what you want and see if it works for you.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I have your link tree here, inbetweenlines.org. People can find you there. And for folks that want to check out your paper, it's on the Quorum website, correct?
So it will be on the Quorum website probably within the next 2 weeks, but I think the LinkedIn post is probably the best place for it at the moment.
Awesome. So we'll relink that for the audience, for all that attended, and for those that want it. Please reach out to us and we will direct you to the right place so you can find complex identity and really engage with it and learn and utilize it, right, for making a change within your own lives and within your own communities. And so with that, I want to transition us into, we have a question from the audience right now. And it reads, you have had the opportunity to reconnect with both your biological family and your care family and your adoptive family, and have really a great ecosystem around you with the different families that you've experienced. How have they grown because of your work, and how have you adapted into navigating your family lives through your work?
I'm very fortunate that both my biological and adoptive families are very supportive of my work. So they've both come to my In Between Lines events and have been very interested in reading the paper. Bless them. And I think navigating it has been quite challenging, and I do have to like make sure that I block out time to make sure that, fortunately this year I've had a lot of like big events where I've like, there's a wedding, there's someone's 21st, so I've had to like, yeah, it's a lot. It takes a lot. Managing my families is just takes up a lot of time, and there's no way of like trying to diminish that. But I think it's also about bringing them together as well, which is why last year was so lovely with the In Between Lines exhibition, because they were all there. So it was really great to create this sort of super large family.
Yeah.
And I know this isn't always the experience for everyone. And I don't know my paternal family. I'm still trying to search there. So it's not like completely all sorted and integrated. That's the impression that these things can give you.
Yeah.
But with what I have, I'm extremely fortunate and lucky. And yeah, I think it's been interesting for them, with my adoptive family, hearing about what it's like for me to be adopted, and then also just reconnecting with my biological family and seeing what the difference is, like nature, nurture kind of thing. I think it's just a really interesting dialogue, and I mean, so far it's been really lovely. So yeah, I'm fortunate in that way.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's always a journey.
Mhm.
People
Yeah, and
often,
things will change.
yeah, well, and just people often hear, right, reunification, and then it just stops the story, but it's just such a continuous journey where you continue growing and learning together. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's very, again, complex,
Yeah,
as
no, I
many
use that
things
word way
are.
too much.
No, but it's true. I mean, navigating our lived experiences is just, it's complex. And, it's so important to hold space for that, like you said. And then another question is, will you be publishing more papers in the future?
Oh, that's a good question. I do feel like once I finished it, I don't want to ever look at Google Scholar again. But I think it would be really fascinating to do a bit more of a deep dive within the communities covered. So really looking at mixed heritage, for example, or adoption. Adoption is a really interesting topic because I assumed that what would create the complex identity for any sort of care experience is having multiple family identities. But from the work that I looked at, people with same race adoption placements didn't really have similar feelings of in-betweenness and cultural flexibility. And so what it seems to be is that, and I only looked at transracial adoption, so this could apply with religion as well, this could apply with class, but there needs to be more research, is that the family is not necessarily the multiple identity, but it is the context in which the identity is formed. And
Mhm.
so for adoptees, the family changes what creates the complexity of identity, where I ethnically am one way but behave culturally in another way.
Yeah.
And I really wish I had more time to, I think that's maybe what I want to look at next, is really get into this adoption care experience perspective and really try and work out the causality there, because I think everyone's adoption journey is so different, and I don't think there's enough from the papers that I looked in the literature review. It doesn't seem like this is getting picked up as a huge issue unless it's transracial adoption.
Yeah.
So I would be really interested in seeing the differences and similarities with same race placements and just the different permutations of that. So
Mm.
watch this space, but I will have a bit of a break because it took a lot.
Yeah, it's a big lift. It's a big lift, and I think you should be really proud of this first published piece, and we can't wait to see more in the future, whenever
Mhm.
that might be. And thank you again for really starting this particular conversation through your work and dedicating so much of your time and energy into lifting up these communities and helping us, right, to connect better together, helping us build more empathy for each other so that, right, we can have a better experience. And I really want to thank you for, again, for making space and time for this conversation today, Anthony. It's been a real pleasure. And I'm so excited that you are friends with us at the Inclusion Initiative. And we can't wait to see what's in store for you and follow your work and your journey. So thank you so much. And audience, thank you. We'll see you next time for another inclusion conversation. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.